Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we're going to take a look at what the anti-life virus really is. Within the vast territory where the most visceral horror and the most unsettling science fiction converge, a narrative space in which comic books have managed to give shape to some of the most disturbing nightmares ever imagined, there are very few infectious agents capable of rivaling, in scope, devastation, and lethality, what is known as the corrupted anti-life equation. This is not simply a virus, nor an abstract curse, nor even a conventional weapon. It is something far worse, something that attacks the very essence of conscious existence itself. This concept comes to life in a brutal and definitive way in DCeased, one of the most celebrated, darkest, and most hopeless alternate universe stories ever published by DC Comics. In this doomed universe, a single mistake born from absolute obsession, an obsession that transcends logic, morality, and life itself, gives rise to a threat that surpasses any known form of warfare technology. A techno-organic pathogen of incalculable power, engendered by Darkseid almost accidentally, yet whose consequences are catastrophic on a universal scale. This infectious entity is not a conscious creation in the traditional sense, but neither is it a passive phenomenon. It appears to possess a primitive form of awareness, a basic and unstoppable impulse whose sole purpose is to spread without limits, to infiltrate every mind, every network, every possible form of communication, using any means at its disposal to contaminate and destroy everything around it. It does not discriminate. It does not reason. It does not negotiate. It simply expands. The virus, also known more directly as anti-life, can be understood as DC Comics' response to the infamous hunger virus from the Marvel Universe, which I discussed recently in another video. If you'd like to check it out, the link is both in the description and in the pinned comment. However, while both concepts share superficial similarities, there is a fundamental difference that completely defines the narrative experience. Whereas in Marvel chaos tends to disperse across multiple timelines, alternate realities, and constant crossovers between stories, DCeased opts for a radically different execution, a compact, coherent, and mercilessly direct narrative. There is no room for unnecessary distractions or secondary events that dilute the threat. Everything is focused on a single point: the origin of the evil, its unstoppable nature, and the irreversible consequences it leaves in its wake. The result is a dark, oppressive, and brutal story, where every death matters, every loss carries weight, and every decision has permanent consequences. An apocalypse that does not stop to explain, justify, or soften its impact. The corrupted anti-life equation is considered, within DC canon, and within the collective imagination of horror and science fiction, one of the deadliest infectious agents ever conceived. Its danger does not lie solely in its mortality rate, but in the fact that it destroys something far deeper than the body. It destroys the will. And for that very reason, in this video, I'm going to break down in depth the entire background of the anti-life virus, how it was created, what its true techno-organic nature is, what effects it has on those who contract it, what its physical and psychological symptoms are, its unique properties, its methods of transmission, and, of course, what happens to the infected, those terrifying entities known as anti-life beings, who emerge after infection as shadows of what they once were. But before we fully dive into the virus itself, it is absolutely essential to understand what the anti-life equation truly is within the DC universe, and what its real purpose is. We are not talking about a simple abstract idea, nor a philosophical metaphor about control or power. The anti-life equation is a transcendental mathematical formula, a cosmic truth encoded in numbers and concepts, capable of completely nullifying free will. Whoever masters it gains the absolute ability to dominate the will of any intelligent being, without exception. It does not matter whether it is a human, a god, an alien, or an ancient cosmic entity. In the face of anti-life, all choice disappears. For this reason, since its earliest appearances, the equation has been the ultimate goal, the supreme obsession, and the final purpose of Darkseid. Classic stories establish that this forbidden knowledge was originally possessed by a man known as Billion-Dollar Bates, who used fragments of the equation to manipulate economic reality and amass an unimaginable fortune. However, his story ended abruptly and violently when one of his own guards murdered him during a special ritual, taking with him to the grave all the secrets Bates possessed about anti-life. Years later, Darkseid began to suspect the existence of this equation after coming into contact with the Martians and understanding their vision of the universe, based on what is known as the life equation, whose essential principle is freedom of choice. For Darkseid, the conclusion was inevitable and deeply disturbing. If life had an equation that guaranteed free will, then there had to exist an absolute counterpart destined to completely deny it. Over time, Darkseid arrived at a chilling revelation. Scattered fragments of the anti-life equation were not hidden in cosmic artifacts or distant dimensions, but in a place far closer and far more vulnerable: Earth, embedded within the collective unconscious of humanity. Ideas, symbols, and patterns of thought that, when combined, form the dormant pieces of the equation. This certainty led Darkseid to fix his attention permanently on the planet, initiating a series of systematic abductions and brutal experiments on human beings, attempting to force the activation of those latent pieces through suffering and manipulation. As has been established in multiple stories, the anti-life equation not only grants absolute control over any conscious mind, but also alters the very structure of reality itself. Its influence is so profound that it distorts the boundary between life and death, since, according to the comics themselves, a being completely stripped of its will ceases to be truly alive, even if its body continues to function. The birth of the techno-organic virus and of the anti-life infected occurs after a desperate attempt by Darkseid to obtain the equation directly, following his defeat at the hands of the Justice League on Earth. Acting in the shadows, without alerting the rest of the heroes, Darkseid kidnaps Cyborg and transports him to Apocalypse, where he keeps him captive for a prolonged and agonizing period of time. It is DCeased, his most loyal and twisted advisor, who reveals the true nature of the plan. Darkseid attempted to fuse the portion of the anti-life equation he already possessed with the other half residing within Cyborg, stored there thanks to the mother box integrated into his body, the very same technology that once saved his life. However, DCeased warns that the procedure would be lethal for Cyborg. Faced with this warning, Darkseid makes an extreme, blasphemous, and unprecedented decision: to summon the Black Racer, the very personification of death within the DCeased universe. By doing so, he manages to extract a fraction of its essence and inject it directly into Cyborg, allowing him to survive the fusion of the equation. Thanks to this forbidden act, Darkseid finally completes the anti-life equation, but the price is unthinkable. The presence of death corrupts the final result. The equation becomes distorted, perverted, and ceases to be merely a formula. It transforms into something alive, into a conscious techno-organic virus. In that moment, without Darkseid being able to fully comprehend it, the fate of the universe is sealed, and the apocalypse that forever defines DCeased begins. In this way, and without ever anticipating it, not even with all his cosmic arrogance and incalculable intellect, Darkseid ended up becoming patient zero of the apocalypse. The conqueror of worlds, the god of absolute tyranny, was the first being to harbor the corrupted anti-life within himself, the exact point at which a catastrophe was born that escaped even his iron will and his capacity for control. For the first time in his eternal existence, Darkseid created something he could not dominate. From that moment on, Apocalypse ceased to be an organized hell and became a purposeless slaughterhouse. The infection spread through Darkseid's body and mind like a silent combustion. He no longer acted guided by the logic of conquest or by his ideological obsession with anti-life. He was now a living vector, a vessel, a catalyst of pure destruction. Completely consumed by the infection, Darkseid unleashed a total massacre upon his own world. The streets of Apocalypse filled with screams, shattered bodies, and structures reduced to rubble. Parademons, slaves, generals, scientists, and lesser gods were exterminated without distinction. Every blow, every contact, every act of violence further propagated anti-life. There was no strategy. There were no orders. Only an uncontrollable expansion that annihilated everything in its path. DCeased, a direct witness to the disaster, watches in absolute horror as his master loses all lucidity. The architect of suffering, the supreme torturer, the scientist of cruelty, understands far too late that he has helped create something to send Cyborg back to Earth. He does not do it out of compassion or heroism, but out of pure survival instinct. His hope is minimal, fragile, yet clear, that the Justice League might manage to stop the plague, or at the very least, contain it before it spreads beyond the imaginable. But even that last spark of hope is quickly extinguished. As time passes, Darkseid ultimately exterminates Apocalypse completely. No resistance remains, no structures, no conscious life. His own homeworld is reduced to silent ruins drifting through the void, a dead monument to his definitive failure. When Cyborg finally reaches Earth, the techno-organic virus housed within his body finds the perfect environment to multiply. Anti-life, far from acting randomly, deliberately infiltrates the internet, corrupting the network from its core. Every server, every data network, every wireless signal becomes an open highway for the infection. Within seconds, every connected device becomes an entry point. Phones, computers, televisions, advertising screens, security systems, satellites, and military networks. Everything transforms into an active vector. The global digital infrastructure, designed to connect humanity, becomes the perfect medium for its annihilation. Within hours, the spread reaches an unimaginable scale. Anti-life expands with terrifying efficiency, infecting the vast majority of the world's population almost simultaneously. There is no time to react. There are no clear warnings. There are no real refuges. As the infection progresses, these individuals lose all rationality. They become violent, erratic, impulsive creatures, displaying behavior reminiscent of classic horror movie zombies. However, they do not act out of hunger or animal instinct. Their only drive is to expand anti-life. They transmit the infection through bites, scratches, and direct contact with bodily fluids such as blood or saliva, turning every encounter into a death sentence. But the horror is not limited to physical contagion. Modern humanity's absolute dependence on technology accelerates the collapse exponentially. Anti-life does not require proximity. It is enough to look at a screen, interact with a device, or receive a signal. The number of infected could rise to billions or even trillions, since the virus has yet to reach every corner of the global digital ecosystem. Thus begins the true apocalypse, the unstoppable expansion of the anti-life virus within the DCeased universe. Some time after this initial catastrophe, Cyborg arrives in Metropolis and interrupts a discussion between Superman and Wonder Woman, who are debating what to do both with him and with the already infected Giganta. The tension is evident. No one fully trusts Cyborg. No one knows whether he is a victim or a weapon. Once in the city, Cyborg addresses the few surviving members of the Daily Planet staff and reveals a deeply unsettling truth. The infected are not truly alive, but neither can they be considered zombies or the undead. even though their appearance and behavior suggest otherwise. According to Cyborg, these creatures are direct manifestations of the corrupted anti-life equation, living extensions of the equation itself. They are not possessed people. They are fragments of a mathematical truth turned into flesh. Faced with this revelation, the heroes decide to move the survivors to the Fortress of Solitude, while Cyborg begins designing arcs and evacuation capsules with the goal of removing humanity from Earth for an extended, even indefinite, period of time. The tragedy reaches a new critical point when Superman becomes infected. Confronted with this absolute threat, Cyborg, Wonder Woman, and Black Canary are forced to face him. A Superman dominated by anti-life, with his colossal strength, impossible speed, and near-infinite endurance, becomes an unstoppable force of destruction. Wonder Woman attempts to stop him using a special sword infused with kryptonite, but the corrupted Man of Steel demonstrates overwhelming superiority. Defeat is inevitable. Superman manages to subdue her and ultimately bites her, transmitting the infection. After this, Superman launches himself at full speed toward the arcs, leaving Earth's atmosphere. Cyborg asks Black Canary to stop him, while he remains on Earth alongside Wonder Woman, fully aware that, as the source of the contagion, his own existence could spread anti-life to other corners of the universe. Later on, Cyborg manages to capture Wonder Woman and uses the lasso of truth to interrogate her. He asks a single question: is there a cure? In a macabre turn, it is anti-life itself that answers through her, revealing that the solution had always been within him. The revelation is devastating. Realizing that countless deaths could have been avoided, Cyborg is paralyzed by guilt and shock. That hesitation costs him everything. Wonder Woman breaks free and, without hesitation, decapitates him, casting his body, still bound by the lasso of truth, into the void. Thus concludes the original story of DCeased. However, this is not the definitive end. It is later revealed that Cyborg continues to exist in a different form, and that, over time, he becomes the key piece in the search for a cure and in offering a possibility of salvation to those infected by anti-life. Now that we have thoroughly explored the initial events and the origin of the virus in DCeased, it is time to pause and analyze the specific characteristics of the corrupted anti-life, its unique properties, the symptoms it causes, the effects it has on its victims, and what truly defines the infected, known simply as the anti-life. Unlike other zombie viruses present in science fiction and horror, the corrupted anti-life equation possesses a radically different nature. It is a techno-organic agent, capable of infecting both living organisms and cybernetic entities without any limitation. Furthermore, it does not spread solely through biological fluids, but also through digital channels, with the internet serving as its primary and most devastating vector of expansion. At the exact moment a living being comes into contact with the anti-life virus, whether through a direct bite, a deep scratch, or simply by touching the fresh blood of an infected individual, the contagion process activates almost immediately. There is no prolonged incubation period, nor an extended silent phase as seen in other fictional pathogens. Here, the infection reacts as if it had been waiting for that contact. Within seconds, anti-life begins to spread inside the host, infiltrating the nervous system, the cellular structure, and, above all, the mind. When transmission occurs through digital means, the process presents a slight variation. It is not instantaneous, but neither is it slow by human standards. It may extend over several minutes, long enough for the victim to experience confusion, extreme anxiety, unbearable headaches, and a constant sensation of mental pressure. However, the final outcome is always the same. There are no known exceptions. The point of no return arrives at the exact moment the infection reaches the brain. It is then that the affected individuals react with absolute, visceral, almost animal desperation. They attempt to tear from their own minds the imposed vision of the corrupted anti-life equation, a conceptual image that embeds itself in the consciousness like an impossible-to-ignore parasite. This act explains one of the most disturbing aspects of the virus: extreme self-mutilation. The infected tear at their faces, rip the skin from their scalps, violently smash their heads against hard surfaces. They claw themselves down to the bone. They do not do this because of physical pain, but out of a desperate need to erase something that cannot be removed. The equation is no longer in their minds. It has become their minds. Very quickly, any psychological resistance collapses completely. Individual will, the final remnant of identity, dissolves. At that point, anti-life assumes total control. What remains is a primitive, brutal, and feral mental state. The infected transform into extremely aggressive creatures, driven by constant violence, exhibiting behavior that superficially resembles that of classic zombies, but in reality follows very different rules. They attack mercilessly any form of conscious life that has not yet been infected. There is no emotional recognition whatsoever. Friends, partners, children, parents, or companions cease to be people. They are simply targets. Every trace of humanity disappears, and the body begins to function as a vessel for the virus, a biological and technological tool whose sole purpose is to expand without limits across the universe. One of the most disturbing traits of the anti-life virus is that it causes visible and progressive physical transformations in those who suffer from it. As the infection advances, the hands of the infected deform, bones reconfigure, and fingers take on elongated, sharpened shapes, similar to claws. This is not a random mutation. These limbs appear to be specifically designed to facilitate contagion and execute swift, brutal killings. Thanks to these claws, the anti-life infected can tear bodies apart with extreme violence, piercing skin, muscle, and even bone with ease. However, despite their monstrous appearance and savage behavior, they do not fit within the traditional concept of zombies or reanimated corpses. This is clearly established in the comics, when Batman explains that the anti-life infected do not attack out of hunger, nor from a biological need to consume flesh. They do not seek to feed. Their aggression responds to a far more unsettling objective: to spread the anti-life equation to every conscious entity that has not yet been reached by the infection. To fulfill that purpose, they infect those they can convert and eliminate without hesitation those they cannot subjugate, ensuring that nothing interferes with the virus's expansion. There is no pleasure, no rage, no sadism, only efficiency. Furthermore, the infection does not cause immediate biological death, nor does it result in an unnatural resurrection. When it is stated that the anti-life infected are not truly alive, this idea must be understood in a deeply symbolic and philosophical sense. It is directly tied to the central effect of the anti-life equation: the total annihilation of free will and the destruction of individual identity. This is confirmed by observing that the infected can die like any living being. If their brain is destroyed, if their body sustains critical damage, if they suffer lethal wounds or severe hemorrhaging, their existence comes to an end. They are not immortal. They are, in essence, living bodies inhabited by an alien will. Although the anti-life infected do not display constant complex thought, nor appear to possess elevated intelligence at all times, something very similar to what is seen with those infected by the hunger virus occurs. They retain their previous abilities intact. This includes superpowers, physical capabilities, military training, combat skills, and even the use of weapons, technology, and advanced devices they mastered before being infected. And most disturbingly, they use them with alarming efficiency. An infected individual with superpowers becomes an apocalyptic threat. An infected individual with access to advanced technology can cause massive destruction within minutes. Cyborg points out that the anti-life infected seem to feel an instinctive attraction toward living beings, as if they can perceive them from a distance. This drives them to actively and constantly seek them out. Additionally, on multiple occasions, the infected demonstrate the ability to plan, coordinate, and develop tactics, overcoming obstacles and defenses with the goal of infecting or exterminating as many individuals as possible. Although they do not always do so, they also retain the ability to speak and communicate, both among themselves and with those they pursue. This communication is not always emotional, but it is functional, strategic, and terrifyingly conscious. A particularly disturbing example of this intelligence occurs in a key scene from the comics, when Cyborg interrogates the infected Wonder Woman using the lasso of truth. In that moment, she speaks with complete clarity, articulating complex ideas and demonstrating full awareness of the situation. This makes it evident that the anti-life infected possess the mental capacity necessary to interact with the living in an apparently normal manner. Later, when Cyborg accidentally frees her, Wonder Woman acts without the slightest hesitation. She decapitates him swiftly, precisely, and mercilessly, fully aware that he has discovered the possible existence of a cure. By eliminating him, she ensures that this information disappears along with him. This act confirms something crucial. The anti-life infected are not only conscious, but also calculating, cold, and strategic, despite their savage appearance. Another fascinating aspect of the virus is that all infected individuals appear to be connected to one another through a kind of hive mind. This suggests that they do not act as isolated individuals, but as extensions of a single central entity, the anti-life virus itself. Through them, the infection observes, learns, adapts, and optimizes its methods of propagation over time. This idea is reinforced when the infected Wonder Woman speaks for the first time and states that they all share a single voice, making it clear that anti-life possesses a form of collective consciousness, a distributed intelligence that uses each infected individual as a node within a living network. Finally, it is particularly revealing that animals are completely immune to the virus. As Detective Chimp explains, the divine entities responsible for the creation of both the life equation and the anti-life equation never intended to exert control over animals. From their arrogant and hierarchical perspective, these beings do not consider animals to be truly conscious entities. Lacking free will in the same sense as rational beings, animals were left outside the reach of both equations. This immunity is not a deliberate blessing, but an indirect consequence of the cosmic arrogance of those who designed the fundamental rules of existence. One of the most disturbing and deeply unsettling elements of the corrupted anti-life equation does not lie solely in the physical devastation it causes or the social collapse it triggers, but in something far more terrifying: the fate that awaits the souls of those who are claimed by the infection. The DCeased comics themselves subtly yet powerfully suggest that these souls find neither rest nor redemption in any known plane of existence. They do not ascend to heaven. They do not descend into hell. They simply remain trapped. The souls of the anti-life infected appear to be suspended in a kind of undefined limbo, an intermediate state between existence and absolute nothingness. They are not dead in a spiritual sense, but neither can they be considered alive. They remain bound to their corrupted bodies, imprisoned within a cage of flesh and data, forced to observe, unable to intervene. Every act of violence, every murder, every atrocity committed through them. This concept turns anti-life into something far more sinister than a simple virus. It does not merely kill bodies. It condemns consciousness. The suffering does not end with infection. It is prolonged indefinitely until someone completely destroys the infected individual's physical form, thereby releasing, late and brutally, the soul trapped within. Death, in this context, ceases to be the worst possible fate and becomes a form of mercy for this infection of technobiological nature. And as with many tragedies in the DC universe, the key to salvation lies within its very origin. The virus is born within Cyborg, a unique being who exists simultaneously as human and machine. Because of this fundamental duality, anti-life adopts a binary structure, a hybrid form that combines. Thanks to it, Cyborg possesses the latent ability to neutralize the pathogen, rewrite its structure, and reverse its effects, even if doing so comes at a devastating personal cost. Although the infection is lethal in the vast majority of cases, it is not invincible in every scenario. There are exceptional individuals capable of resisting it, especially those endowed with extraordinary regenerative abilities. A notable example is Deathstroke, who becomes infected and transformed into an anti-life entity for an extended period of time. During that time, Deathstroke behaves like any other infected individual, losing his autonomy and becoming an extension of the virus. However, his superhuman healing factor begins to operate constantly, slowly and relentlessly. The process of expelling the virus is extremely painful, traumatic, and prolonged, but he ultimately manages to purge anti-life from his system and regain his original state. This case demonstrates that, while rare, resistance is not impossible. However, the first is that, upon falling under the control of anti-life, the individual's original personality is completely suppressed, erased from the equation. Nothing remains of who that person once was. The second implication is even more disturbing. All evidence points to the anti-life virus possessing a consciousness of its own, an autonomous intelligence that does not merely use the infected as simple vessels of propagation. At key moments, anti-life speaks through them, communicates, reasons, and responds. This is clearly observed in the encounters between the infected Wonder Woman and Cyborg, where it is not Diana who speaks, but the corrupted equation itself manifesting through her body. Another fascinating characteristic of the virus is revealed when Superman encounters Big Barda and notices something profoundly strange. Her body shows no signs of physical deterioration, aging, or biological degeneration. There is no necrosis, no cellular decay. From this observation, Superman formulates a chilling theory. Anti-life keeps the infected in a state of absolute biological stasis, locking them precisely at the point in their life cycle at which they were infected. Time ceases to move forward for them. They do not age. They do not weaken. They do not change. This means that if an individual is spent under the virus's control, decades of infection could vanish in an instant, as if they had never occurred. This condition explains why the anti-life infected appear virtually immortal from a biological perspective. They do not need to eat. They do not require water. They do not sleep. They do not rest. They function constantly and tirelessly, like living machines driven by a single command: to expand. However, the virus does not affect all beings equally. One particularly perplexing detail is that, although Darkseid was directly infected, his advisor and ally DCeased never contracted anti-life, despite being present during the virus's creation and witnessing the birth of the corrupted anti-life equation. The comics never provide a definitive explanation, leaving open the possibility that unknown factors, biological, metaphysical, or even narrative, may influence susceptibility to the virus. With this, we arrive at everything currently known about the anti-life virus within the DCeased universe. Personally, I consider this pathogen to be one of the most fascinating concepts ever explored in comics, precisely because it completely departs from the traditional zombie infections we usually analyze. Its techno-organic nature allows it to spread both through biological means and through technological systems, something made possible only by its direct link to the anti-life equation, one of the most powerful and feared forces in the DC universe. It is especially interesting that this virus shares similarities with the Selenium virus from World War Z and with the Hunger virus from Marvel Zombies. Like them, anti-life demonstrates intelligence, adaptability, and a form of self-awareness. And although at first glance the anti-life infected appear to be the primary threat, intelligent, violent, and capable of being killed by conventional means, this perception is misleading. In reality, the true danger is not the infected, but the virus itself, a living, autonomous, and independent entity that uses bodies, minds, and souls as temporary tools. The anti-life infected are nothing more than extensions of its will, precisely because of its threat level, its hybrid nature, and its ability to learn and adapt. I consider the corrupted anti-life equation virus to be one of the most terrifying pathogens ever conceived in comics, as well as in contemporary science fiction and horror. Honestly, it would be spectacular to see this concept adapted into an animated DC film, where its full philosophical, emotional, and existential weight could be explored without restraint. And now I want to know your opinion. Leave it in the comments. Did you already know about the anti-life virus from DCeased? Did you know its origin and how its story developed? Which do you think is more powerful, the anti-life virus from DC or the Hunger virus from Marvel? And finally, which aspect of anti-life do you find the most terrifying, and why? I'll be reading your comments. Thank you, as always, for staying with me until the end. If you enjoyed the video, share it to support the channel, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming content.